Good morning, folks. My name is Rohit Mehra. I work with IDC. I lead their network infrastructure practice worldwide. And it's my honor to present to you today here my vision and give you some background and some insights in terms of where the market is going from a cloud and mobility perspective. Share some of my insights, but also share with you a lot of data that we have collected over many, many surveys that we do every year on a global basis. So some of the data that I shared with you may be specific to Korea, but I will also point out to you where globally there are clear market trends that might be relevant for you to take note, so you can think about implementing similar architectures, and get similar benefits from your deployments that you might be pursuing in this area. So to get started, I just want to share with you the short time that I have today. I want to maybe break it up because as Steve Wood covered, there's a lot of different aspects of HPE and Aruba that you guys are into. And from that perspective, I think it's important to look at how mobility and cloud get together and are creating sort of this perfect storm, which is not just an opportunity for vendors like HPE and Aruba, but I think it is also an opportunity for IT practitioners like yourselves, whether you are the CIO or you are a network manager, for you to be thinking in terms of what you can do within your enterprise to really have a more impactful journey along with the enterprise with your IT department. So I'll start by talking a little bit about digital transformation. You probably have heard about digital transformation, and I'm trying to speak a little bit slow because I think for many of you there is a translation happening in parallel, just to make sure that everyone goes along with me. But I'm going to break digital transformation into cloud, IoT, and mobility, because these are the three attributes that really contribute to give you the scale that you need, whether you are a large enterprise or you might be a cloud provider. I will then jump into mobility trends and architectures, and then finally get to cloud and the data center network, and where is the market going and what are some of the key trends in that space. And then I'll leave you with some final thoughts. So, embarking on this discussion around the digital transformation, the key aspect that we should think about is the economy itself is becoming digital. We are seeing organizations of all types, whether they are small, a public sector, you might be in government, you might be in healthcare, you might be in retail. So irrespective of what kind of business you are in, or you are in the public sector like government, the challenges of some of these external factors, so whether you are the CEO or a line of business manager, or you might be a CIO heading the IT department, you are now, these days, faced with multiple external attributes and factors that are impacting your business. And you want to be able to respond to these, whether it's at a technology level, or an architecture level, or in many cases, you might be actually impacting via your IT decision-making and your choices that you make. You might be actually creating new revenue streams, new business opportunities for your enterprise. So the role of IT managers really is far different today in this digital economy than it has ever been in the past. No question, a lot of IT folks are under pressure and are working very closely with their line of business managers. So let's look at this, the move to digital transformation. At IDC, we call this platform the third platform. And you probably, if you've read some of our literature, you know what third platform is all about. It's built on the foundation of cloud, big data analytics, social business, and mobility. These are, you could say, these are the pillars of the third platform of IT. Now, if you start to build on these pillars, what we are seeing today is we are seeing innovation accelerators as part of digital transformation. Whether it's next generation security, whether it's Internet of Things or cognitive systems, right? 3D printing in some cases also is very closely tied to IT and businesses as well. So if you look at this and build on this further, you'll see a verticalized view of the enterprise that really embraces digital transformation. So if you are in healthcare, you are thinking about how you're going to leverage various IT resources from a healthcare perspective. If you are in government, you are thinking about smart cities and all other government-related, aspects. And similarly, if you are in retail, you are thinking how you can leverage the digital infrastructure that your IT department has to improve the state of the business. So, pretty compelling transformation, which is almost once in a generational transformation that we are seeing within IT. The key pieces that I do want to point out to you today is, one is cloud, the second is IoT, and third is, you'll see, mobility. So ultimately, anything that happens vis-a-vis enterprise IT is related to one, two, or three of these attributes that belong to this era of digital transformation. So moving along, you'll see, I'll give you some examples on how we think digital transformation is upon us, and you will be able to relate to this very easily. You take a look at this on the left-hand side of the screen. This is this Sirona biogeneric dental impression system. A dentist or a dental practitioner with one click can now create up to 4 prints, 4 copies of veneers, inlays, bridges, what you like. So literally within minutes, what used to take days and days when you visited the dentist's office, right? Look at this other picture here. The Airbus 350, this is the new generation aircraft. Each wing of this aircraft has over 10,000 sensors that is creating nearly 5 terabytes of data per day when it's flying. You can imagine the amount of big data being generated which has to be really analyzed and can provide a lot of insights for people at the airlines, for the manufacturers of the engines, the aircraft, and so on. And finally, this is my favorite. If you've heard of the sleep number mattresses, in quite a few regions of the world, these are very popular. And basically, for the people who sleep on the mattresses, the sensors can actually get hold of a lot of your vital information, including your heart rate, your blood pressure, and other vital signs that actually help generate a sleep number, of course, but they also give you some kind of recommendations on how you can improve your sleep patterns, but also how you can improve the average health status of any person who's sleeping on this mattress. So essentially, what we are seeing is, these are just 3 examples that I've given you, but basically, whether it's IoT or it's cloud, they are driving this need for scale in such a way which is unprecedented. And that's why the need for a lot of the cloud technologies that we are seeing, which is directly as a result of what is happening in the enterprise with digital transformation. The other piece that I mentioned a few minutes ago was around IoT. So let's look at where IoT intersects with third platform. If you recollect a few minutes back, I talked about the third platform, right? So let's look at how these come together. IoT is right in the middle of all of this, and around this, I've drawn this picture of the third platform of IT with cloud, big data, social business, and mobility. Let's take a minute to go through each one of these so you can get a little more insightful feedback in terms of where the industry and where the market is going and what folks like yourselves in IT should be thinking about. So if you think about cloud, and you'll hear from Amol more about cloud as well today, variable workloads from connected endpoints, you're thinking about scalability and flexibility as well for the deluge of data that's coming into the enterprise. And of course, on a country by country or a region by region, there are sovereignty issues or security issues. And then you have a number of vendors who are actually vying to deliver products and services into this space. You can see there's GE, there's cloud providers like Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and then there are, of course, large players like IBM and Hewlett-Packard Enterprise as well. Let's switch over to big data analytics. This is all about real-time decision making. You really have the engine with big data to really get new data streams, analyze new data streams, and provide very insightful analytics that can be used for business decision making. So who are some of the players here? There's Salesforce, there's Oracle, SAP, IBM, Microsoft, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, of course, here as well. Then looking at social business, this is really an outlet for automated responses because we know we are all have our own favorites when it comes to social media. And there are a number of players who are in this space as well. And finally, when it comes to mobility, how do you allow connections of endpoints from various locations? You might be in your corporate office, you might be in a remote site. And how are you able to activate some of these IoT applications from your mobile devices? So from that perspective, there is Citrix, there's HPE, there's Microsoft, there's Cisco, there's a number of vendors who are vying for attention in this space as well. So you see that there's a lot going on from an IoT perspective. But let me then draw you back to mobility and how it meets cloud. I think the interconnections you'll find are going to be very, very relevant. So if you look at the chart that's right in front of you, on the right-hand side, you can see all kinds of mobile devices. You have an iPhone or a Samsung phone, and then you might be using different types of other, handheld devices, collaboration devices, and so on. And then you're now trying to connect to various data centers and cloud portals, etc., depends on the application that you are trying to access. So it's getting to be fairly complex with the type of app you might be using, collaboration applications that allow you to talk to other offices, right? You might be accessing cloud apps, CRM, ERP, or Salesforce.com and other cloud applications. So the net is that irrespective of whether you being in retail or education or healthcare or government, you are being challenged to provide mobile access to cloud-based applications. And some of these might be consumer-based applications as well, right? So once you've looked at these and you start thinking about mobility, let's look at how does this change the workplace that we all live and work in. We know that digital is upon us, and then the digital workplace really has some other requirements. The first one being a mobile-first network design. And that is largely because wireless and mobility is really becoming the primary access methodology when it comes to enterprises. There's also the issue of standards in Wi-Fi, and you'll hear from a lot of Aruba and HPE folks today around various wireless standards. And it doesn't matter whether you are on wave 1 or wave 2 of AC. The key is that you should be thinking in terms of what kind of capacity and what kind of add-on network services and security services you need to really embrace this digital workplace concept. Then, of course, you need to be thinking in terms of cloud services and then wired and wireless. I need to be thinking kind of cohesively around a wireless and wired infrastructure for the enterprise. And then, of course, how do I optimize that network design? And this afternoon, you're going to hear a lot from the engineers themselves on how do you optimize your network infrastructure. So to give you some more insights on this, and I have a lot of survey data to share with you. Most of the survey data is actually global, so you'll get an idea of what the industry is thinking. So what we asked in one of our surveys was, what factors are leaders in the increase in wireless traffic? And you can see some pretty compelling data here. One is just that transition from desktop to wireless devices and laptops. Second is the increased number of smart mobile devices, and of course, like tablets, etc. There's also the increase of collaboration applications, and that, I think, is something that people don't think about as much, because some of the performance attributes of collaborative and video applications have a pretty transformative impact on the network. And I'll be talking a little more about that in a couple of minutes. So what are some of the use cases that really heighten the need for network transformation within the whole context of digital transformation? The very first one, of course, is mobility. No question, I've just mentioned to you how important mobility is for the enterprises of today, right? The second is the whole proliferation of UC&C applications. And in many cases, these are now cloud-based applications. You are familiar with UCaaS, Unified Communications as a Service, that again leverages cloud technologies to put at your hands, at your fingertips, various UC applications, like voice and video. Right? So then you also want to think about, if I'm going to start activating new branches, new regional offices, or remote workers, how do I simplify the deployment and provisioning of these workers? And of course, last but not the least is really, how do I rapidly respond to security threats? That's another key aspect of why network transformation is upon us, and really something that you should be thinking about embracing within the context of digital transformation. The other piece I want to talk about, we've talked about mobility, but not as much attention has been paid to how the cloud itself, cloud services, can actually increase the value of your networking solutions. So a lot of folks globally, and certainly in North America, are leveraging this whole concept of cloud-managed networking. We've seen and really experienced how cloud-managed wireless LAN, meaning cloud-managed Wi-Fi, is upon us, and there are a number of solutions, including from Aruba, that really allow you to manage and deploy a cloud-managed Wi-Fi network. But thinking ahead, my vision for the future is that a lot of networking technologies actually will leverage the cloud-managed aspects, including provisioning, deployment, planning, and even the management and troubleshooting aspects are very well served in a cloud-managed model. But of course, I think it's fair to say that it's not necessarily for everybody. Depending on the size of your branches, depending on how many branches you have, you may want to think about whether you want an on-prem model for networking, or do you want a cloud-managed model for networking. But it's certainly an option that wasn't there 3 to 5 years ago, is now going to be available first with wireless, but eventually all other networking technologies, including LAN, WAN, and a number of other network and security services can be deployed and managed via the cloud. So now that we're thinking in terms of cloud-managed networking, I do think that there is going to be a renaissance of campus network virtualization. IT has become quite familiar with how virtualization came about in the data center, whether you are a cloud provider or you're enterprise IT. You have enjoyed the benefits of virtualization in the data center. The question is, can that virtualization be replicated into campus networks? And we do think that with the advent of software-defined networking, you're going to see more of that. And you might be familiar with this term called NFV. It's definitely a more of a telco-centric term because it came from ETSI, Network Function Virtualization. But we believe that there is a version of NFV which is enterprise-centric. And what that means is the ability to virtualize some of your common enterprise network functions, layer 3 routing, right? WAN optimization, wireless controllers, of course, firewall, VPN, DDoS, a number of network and security services. If you can virtualize and run on industry standard hardware, I think that's going to give you the best of what cloud brings to the table and what virtualization brings to the table as well. And I think in the coming 3 to 5 years, you're going to see this industry shift that leverages kind of the best of both worlds, virtualization as well as cloud. I'm going to switch a little bit now to cloud before I get to data center and share with you our views on where cloud is going, and specifically public and private cloud. So what you're seeing here on the chart here is from our Cloud View survey, which is actually one of the most elaborate surveys that IDC ever does. This goes to over 10 to 11,000 respondents globally. It is possible that some of you here in Seoul have responded to IDC's Cloud View surveys, so you shouldn't be surprised at some of the data that you are actually being shown back to you. What we are seeing here is basically, with the question that was asked was, in case you cannot read it clearly, how would you best describe your organization's current or near-term plans to deploy and use public cloud or private cloud solutions? And you'll see nearly 60% folks said that they are embracing public or private cloud with more than 1 or 2 applications. Pretty impressive for something that was not as rampant about 5-7 years ago. And another 20% say they are deploying, meaning they have plans, or they might be just using in a contained manner 1 or 2 applications. So let's look at the trend. How does this compare year over year? Our data for 2015 showed, if you look to the left, 24% folks said that 1 or 2 small apps or workloads they were going to the cloud for. With a survey that we just finished in early 2016, that number has jumped to 57.9%. That's a 137% increase in terms of IT embracing cloud applications, irrespective of the industry that they are in. Pretty significant market transition is happening towards public and private cloud. So now that we've kind of determined, okay, cloud is happening, whether it's public or private, how does this impact the networking domain? So we at IDC think that the growth of especially public cloud has created a lot of opportunities, not just for the cloud providers, but for many of the solution providers and networking platform providers, all the way across the supply chain. Meaning starting with the semiconductor solution providers. And you know the likes of, there's Broadcom and Cavium and a bunch of other folks who are directly working with some of the largest cloud providers now. Microsoft, Amazon Web Services, I can go on, Google. These are hyperscale cloud providers. And then of course, some of these are in China as well with Baidu, Tencent and others. They are looking at the entire supply chain and trying to determine what makes the best sense for them in terms of their infrastructure. So there's the OEM piece, there's the ODM piece, and certainly innovations that come from these public cloud providers, the hyperscalers, will actually tend to get carried over into the broad enterprise. So if you are an enterprise IT practitioner, you are going to see some of those benefits in the next 3 to 5 years come to you as well. And of course, this will also lead to other aspects like disaggregation, and I'm going to talk about that as well. But before we do that, I want to give you a chart that shows to you how traditional IT is gradually giving way to public and private cloud. So if you look at this chart, and last year, 2015, the majority of this market was traditional IT. And if you fast forward all the way to 2020, you see nearly 60% of the market is taken over by public and private cloud. Public being actually a little bit bigger, quite a bit bigger than private cloud. But nevertheless, public and private both will grow pretty significantly over the next few years. Traditional IT still stays relevant, but is giving way gradually to cloud. So one of the other survey data points I wanted to share with you was, it was around software-defined networking. And the question we asked was, if you are implementing SDN in your data center, please tell us, what is your primary motivation for SDN? And here are some of that data. And in this survey chart, and I think folks on the left and right can see this as well, the dark blue is cloud provider responses. And there's 75 cloud providers responded to this survey. And on the right-hand side, the light blue is 327 enterprises responded to the survey. And basically, the results are for you to see. Cloud providers told us very clearly that they need the network to have more agility to support virtualization and cloud. No question, that was the number one. From an enterprise standpoint, you can see the number one was improving security in the data center with features and capabilities such as microsegmentation. And it doesn't mean that the others were not relevant. They are relevant as well, but I just want to highlight some of the key findings from this SDN survey that we do on an annual basis. Some of the use cases that I want to talk about when you start thinking about deploying SDN for cloud in your data center, basically increase server virtualization and how the workloads are increasing rapidly as a result of the third platform. There's business and operational agility. Security use cases are abundant. You probably have heard about enough cases around microsegmentation and others. And there's also business continuity. There are others as well, but I think if I have to pick the top 3, these would be the key use cases that I would want to highlight for you. The other aspect is something that's near and dear to my heart, and that is the whole move and the industry's transition to a DevOps model to deploy new applications in the enterprise. And certainly, cloud and SDN are fairly disruptive. We know that. But this was one case where restructuring of IT, and obviously this should be important to you folks as well, because most of you are IT practitioners yourselves, IT managers, network managers, right? So the question we asked in this survey was, as a result of adoption of cloud and SDN, does your organization plan to restructure? And the results were fairly compelling, and I've actually charted 2 years data here. So you can actually compare and contrast what folks told us for 2014 and then what they told us in 2015. And you can see, and once again, light blue is enterprise, dark blue is cloud providers. So if you focus in on the enterprise just in the interest of time, you can see last year, the one prior year, 22.7% folks said that they have restructured in this whole transition towards DevOps. Whereas in 2015, that number moved to 35%. Pretty significant transition that actually impacts the roles that many of you in this hall, the roles that you will play as enterprise IT practitioners. So we need to be thinking in terms of how do we adopt more collaborative IT operational models where the server folks, the server admins, the application folks can all work in a collaborative manner with the networking experts in the firm. And that's not just actually job security, it actually furthers the goals of the network practitioners because then you have a seat at the table, which is part of this collaborative approach to deploying new services and applications. So pretty significant transition that we think impacts IT folks and network managers. So talking about that, this chart is from IDC Planscape that we published just a few months ago. This is sort of our prescriptive approach to deploying SDN and the organizational challenges that go along with them. So if you're an IT practitioner, the what, the why, the how of deploying SDN is very, very important. So the what, I think, is very clear. SDN is an architectural approach. You cannot buy SDN. SDN is not a box. It's not a product. But SDN is more of an architecture, and you're going to hear from various HPE experts today about what this architecture is all about, right? Then the next question is why. And really the why is around the benefits that SDN brings to the table for your enterprise or your service provider organization, right? The ability to really do faster provisioning and bring that sense of agility, the one that I talked about when we talked about digital transformation, is very, very important. And then the question is how. You want to be able to educate key decision makers in terms of how the network can be less of a cost center, but more of an enabler of business processes and more of a business accelerator to really help with your business goals, right? And lastly, it's the who. Who are the folks within IT and within even the line of business that need to be thinking about making this change. So in the context of SDN and cloud, I thought it's also relevant to talk a little bit about open source networking. And you'll be hearing from HP folks later today about OpenSwitch and various other initiatives that HP has made over the last couple of years. So you'll certainly hear more about it. And that's why I wanted to provide that context about what is open source networking and why should you care. From a vendor perspective, I think vendors are certainly, these are the solution providers, they are looking for sustainable value creation, meaning leverage the power of community from an open source perspective, but provide additional incremental capabilities to the solutions that the vendors already have. So as an end user, what you folks can think of is, this actually is beneficial to you because you get the existing networking solutions, but you get the power of community behind open source software that gets integrated into these networking solutions. And so from that perspective, I do think there's a lot of good work going on in the industry to integrate open source networking compared to the typical traditional black box approach that the networking industry has had over the last couple of decades. So when we talk about open source, we cannot not talk about network disaggregation. So what is the value proposition of network disaggregation? And by the way, for those of you who are not completely familiar, network disaggregation, just in 30 seconds, is really the breaking down of the hardware and the software components of any network device. In other words, take the network OS out of the box and you have it as a completely separate entity. And that, in many cases, allows you to source your hardware from a separate provider and source your network OS from a different solution provider. So savings on CapEx, savings on OpEx, business and other operational efficiencies. You could now run basically a network OS that you are familiar with and you like, and you can couple that with industry standard hardware sourced from a vendor or from a channel that you are very, very comfortable with. So what's the addressable market? If you are a cloud provider or a data center operator that is really operating at scale, this is something you want to think about in the coming years. I'm not quite ready to say that this is ready for the broader enterprise yet, but I think that the market transition is happening in that direction. So think 3 to 5 years out, and you will likely be embracing some of these trends. And the other aspects, the other areas where I think this is a good fit is going to be where a lot of network changes happen on the fly very, very rapidly. Also Linux shops, DevOps. I talked quite a bit about DevOps. So those are some of the areas, if you have embraced, then maybe you want to be thinking about network disaggregation. So as I've done with some other points that I have made today, I have some survey data as well. So we asked a question: as part of your network architecture, have you considered a hardware agnostic third-party network OS? And of course, keep this in mind that when we did this, HP's OpenSwitch was not one of the options. That's a new development only in the last few months. But net, whether it's a cloud provider or an enterprise, we were pleasantly surprised at the positive acceptability to even consider a third-party network operating system. 2 or 3 years ago, this would have been close to 0. Or 5 years ago, I can almost guarantee this would have been 0 in terms of this survey results. So pretty significant shift is happening in terms of disaggregation, and you'll be hearing more about this from HPE experts later today. In terms of what's coming with disaggregation, if you are familiar with OCP, this is Facebook's initiative, the Open Compute Project, that looks at servers and other pieces of infrastructure as well. But from a networking perspective, there are switches being actually really rolled out in at least some very large cloud providers that are OCP compliant. So, of course, the more vendors in this space, choice is always going to be good. It's a free market, but you don't want so much choice that it paralyzes the market. So we do think that in the coming years, there is going to be a filtering down of some of these solutions and some of the choices. So in the end, the winners are going to be those platforms, hardware, as well as software, that actually will truly be the solutions of choice going forward for enterprise shops like yourself. And lastly, and I want to emphasize this, it's not just the ODMs and the third-party OS providers who are actually going to be doing this. I think the success of network disaggregation depends a lot on the major IT players and providers of compute and networking and others. And I'm talking about folks like Dell, HPE, Lenovo. There's a bunch of, these are big names in the industry, and how they make this consumable for customers like yourselves is going to determine how in the next 3 to 5 years network disaggregation comes about. I want to also talk a little bit about a topic that comes up quite a bit, especially in North America, but I think slowly it's making its way to other parts of the world, and that is the topic of containers. Maybe some of you are familiar with containers, but essentially, containers are just another form of application abstraction. Since some of you might be new to containers, I thought I'll make this very, very simple. So if nothing else, you can take this as an educational slide to understand what containers are and what do they bring to the table in terms of your benefits. So if you look at your classic virtualization, you have your typical server, which was replaced by a hypervisor, and then you had your OS, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, the OS, that particular OS runs on it, and you can have multiple OSs running on a server and a hypervisor. So when containers come around, basically what we are seeing is that it's the same server, the same compute function, and now you have a shared thin OS. You don't need to replicate the OS or the base system software in a container world. I think that's the key difference, and that brings in some newer levels of efficiencies that have not been seen before. And to that extent, while this is very new, very early, emerging, we do think in the next 5 years there's going to be more interest, a lot more interest in the container world, not completely at the cost of the virtualization domain, because I think both will be kind of existing in parallel, but the container world will grow significantly in the coming years. So I think I'm pretty much out of time. I'm going to leave you with a few final thoughts. I covered a lot of ground. I don't think I've had a keynote like this where I've covered everything from mobility to SDN to cloud. It's a lot to cover in 30, 40 minutes, but hopefully I did justice to that. But a few key points. Third platform, which really I talked about quite extensively, sets the stage for digital transformation. The enterprise network must transform to a mobility-first architecture at the edge of the network. That's a key requirement, no question, and especially with cloud and mobility together. SDN and disaggregation, again, if you are in the cloud or in the data center, you need to be thinking about these architectural changes that are coming your way. And essentially, the more digitized your business becomes and the more you embrace digital transformation, I think it's fair to say that network transformation has to parallel that effort as well. And with that, I appreciate and thank you for your time.